Eva here. Today I'm going to show you how to incorporate centangles into your watercolors.
So I usually have a board, but you don't always have to. If you have a block or if you're painting on 300 pound, you don't necessarily have to have a board. I have my very important water control station here. I'm left-handed, so mine is on the left side, and so is my palette. If you're right-handed, you want to have it on the right. And my water control station consists of an old towel that I tear up or cut up and put under my palette, and I have a space here for my brushes, and then I wet up some Viva paper towel. This is where I control the water in my brushes. That's major important in watercolor. That's why people get in trouble. It's because they don't control the water in their brushes. And then my palette, I like to have a palette that has a lid. So I have a lid for my palette so that when I pack up and when it's sitting, it doesn't get dog hair and cat hair and dust and whatnot in it. And also, you know, I can travel with it. I have a spray bottle, also an important tool for me. The first thing I do when I take the lid off my paint is I give it a good whiff of water with my spray bottle, and I keep them moist throughout the painting session. I squeeze out a good amount of pigment in my wells, and I like to let it dry up, and then, you know, just give it a little bit of water and it's good to go. That way, if I, by accident, which happens, knock my palette on the side or, God forbid, upside down in my bag, it's not all gonna run together and be one color mud. So that's why I like it like that. Other people, they like to push out fresh paint every time. That's not my preferred method, but there's nothing wrong with it. Everybody's different. I have always 2 containers of water. One that I try to keep clean for mixing my colors so that they're clean and not polluted with dirty water that I've rinsed out my brushes in, and the other I rinse out my brush in. Sooner or later I mess up and get them all dirty, and then I get fresh water, and we have water over there. And by the way, we have restrooms through that little curtain door on the right. Okay, so here's my sketch, and as I did it probably a little darker than I would have normally done, because, you know, I'm teaching and I want you to be able to see. And plus, you know, I'm gonna do the lines with a pen afterwards, so I'm not, too worried about it. I have my kneaded eraser because what I don't know, I'm terrible. Even when I'm just sketching with a basic pencil like this, I somehow get graphite everywhere. I don't know why. So I usually kind of roll up my kneaded eraser into a little sausage, and then I just kind of gently roll it over the paper, and that way it picks up that extra pigment that I'm not really, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having that pigment on there, but I'm just, you know, I don't like my colors polluted in any way, shape, or form. So I just usually do that if I've been doing a sketch, which, you know, a lot of times I have on my paper. Now, if I do really complicated sketches, well, not really complicated, but even just a little bit more where I'm kind of searching for the lines, I would do my drawing on a separate piece of paper. I just use copy paper most of the time. And then I trace it onto my watercolor paper, because I'm not a confident drawer. It's not like I can just draw something out and every line is perfect. There's a lot of erasing going on searching for the right lines and stuff. And so that means there will be a lot of erasing on my watercolor paper. And even though I use a kneaded eraser, but then, you know, all my fingers and everything and all the graphite and stuff, I feel that it compromises the watercolor paper. And for psychological reasons, for my own little mind game, is if I have spent a long time on a drawing, and if I'd done it directly on the watercolor paper, I would be kind of a little paranoid, because then I have this little person sitting on my shoulder saying, you spent this much time on the drawing, so this better be perfect. Well, it's the, you know, that's the doomsday right there. If you tell yourself whatever you're doing has to be perfect, forget it. It's gonna be not very good, because you're gonna revert into the little child that doesn't want to paint outside the lines and stuff. Does not make, in my opinion, for a very interesting painting. So when I have it on a separate piece of paper and I have traced it onto my watercolor paper, I tell myself, if I screw it up, I'll just trace it again on another piece. No big deal. I have the paint. I have the drawing, which is the part I'm more about, you know, getting to putting the colors on. That's what I enjoy. The drawing is kind of more the work part for me. Other people are different, you know, but that's just how I operate. So anyway, for those reasons, I don't draw more complex shapes directly on my watercolor paper.
I have a question.
Yes?
When you're tracing, Eva, do you use like the window or do you use a light box? Or
At home in my studio, I usually use a light box. Yeah. I also have, you know, tracing paper, and I have here that you can borrow. If you use tracing paper, then I get even more, you know, graphite everywhere.
I know, yeah.
But I mean, certainly usable. When and if you use tracing paper, be very, very certain that you use the kind that has no grease or wax in it, because, you know, grease and wax does not mix with water, so it would repel the watercolor. So the lines would definitely be very obvious, and they are not erasable then. So if you buy tracing paper, you have to be really certain that it says no wax or grease. And when you read the little miniature description of, you know, what it's good for, which you usually have to have like a magnifying glass to read it, but it makes sure it says paper, because there's a lot of tracing papers or what is it called? Graphite paper. Transfer paper, that's what it's called. That's the technical term, because tracing paper is really just a see-through paper, and it doesn't transfer lines. But anyway.
It does if you go over on the back.
Yeah, on the back side you can. Yeah.
And then put it down the way you want it up, and if you go over it, it comes
Yeah,
up.
you can make your own tracing paper if push comes to shove. You know, with just putting with a regular pencil, you can just put graphite on the back, onto the lines.
But in the fine print, Eva, it should say tracing paper? Is that
It should, no, it should say transfer paper, and it should say grease and wax free. Yes, and it should say one of the surfaces that it should say that it is good for. It should say paper, because some of them does not have say paper, and they don't necessarily specify that it contains grease and wax. And it's best to have it, I find it's best to have it the graphite color, because some students have come to class and they have like yellow or something. Not that there's anything wrong with yellow with transfer paper, but you can't really see it on the white paper. And I've also seen it blue, and you know, sometimes blue might be okay. I don't know. I just think graphite is the safest, because it'll work with all colors, and you don't have that other color interfering with what you're painting. All right, so enough about that. I am going to just paint in the sky first. And we're not going to go into a whole lot of detail with the mountains and the hills or whatever, but we're just going to get a little color on them. And then we're going to go to work with our pens. So I'm going to use Cobalt blue, and you know, I already sprayed it, and I'm mushing it around. You never ever want to go straight from here, even if you kind of mush it around a little bit in the well there, and then go here, because you have no clue how much water to pigment level you have. I can see that when I go out here and mush it around good, because I want, first of all, to make sure that all the pigment particles are dissolved in the water. I don't want little globs of pigment, because when I get it onto my watercolor paper, it's going to give me a line, or you know, a mark, and I won't be able to get rid of that. So here we have that, because it's Cobalt blue, and rinse that out. And just for fun, I'm gonna get my puddles out now. I'm gonna get a little bit of this pink out. This is Opera Rose. If you don't have Opera Rose, pick another one, or you can pick a red, or and put a little bit of the blue in. That's gonna make it pink. Look at the water here. See that? Lavender. All right. And you know, you choose whatever colors speak to you. It doesn't have to be the same colors that I have. Then I'm going to have a little bit of the pink. I have the Cobalt blue. I'll probably also get some French Ultramarine blue. That's a stronger blue, a darker blue. Cobalt blue doesn't go very dark, so I'm going to get a little bit of that. and mush that around good. And rinse my brush out. And that's another important thing. Good practice, good watercolor practice. Don't ever dip a dirty brush into your wells out here, because it's going to take you about 20 minutes and every color is the same, mud, if you mix them like that. You want to keep these clean. And then what else do we want? I think I'm going to go with a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm going to put that here. That's kind of an orangey brown. And it makes some nice, it's a nice color to mix with cobalt and with French ultramarine blue to gray those blues down. It's basically using your color wheel. If you look at the color wheel that I have up there, if you look at the true blue, which is French ultramarine up there, and then if you go straight across, you see orange. So orange and blue, they're complementary colors. Important to know, because if you mix them together, they neutralize each other. Okay, now this is of course not, burnt sienna is not a clean orange. It's been polluted already. Orange consists of red and yellow. That's how you make orange. And then this one, since it's more brownish, I already know that it has some blue in it. That's how you make, so you can make your own burnt sienna. You mix orange and you put a little bit of blue in it, and it's going to turn kind of a rusty color. And you can look at my water here. Can you see it?
Now it's gray.
Now it's gray with a little tinge of lavender, because I also had the pink in. So there's a little overweight of the red blue.
Do you use a new palette for each painting?
No,
You don't?
no.
Okay.
No, this is my palette. I just squeeze color in when they get low, like, you know, I'm getting a little low there, but I think I'm good. And then we're gonna have one more color, just so that we have it now. And that's yellow. And this is my favorite yellow, is transparent yellow. I love that yellow. It doesn't look very pretty in the well.
Is it the
Looks
iron
kinda-
oxide, transparent iron oxide yellow?
No, it's transparent yellow is what it's called. It's from Winsor Newton. As far as I know, they're the only ones who make a transparent yellow like this one. I think the one you're talking about looks has a little bit more red in it. So that looks more like Quinacrodone gold, which I do have on here, which is a warmer yellow. And a lot of you have other yellows. Maybe you have lemon yellow, or you have Aurelian yellow, or Mayan yellow. It's all fine. It's just I happen to like this yellow, and I know how it behaves. You know, if you've just painted a little bit, you know that the colors, they behave differently. They don't all behave the same. Like some colors, they're really dominant, they take over the whole show. They rush into the other colors if you let them. And other colors, they just kind of sit there.
Like phthalo.
Yeah.
Once you get a phthalo, it's like, oh my
Oh,
God.
yeah. It takes over everything. That's why I took it off my palette,
Yeah,
because for teaching
absolutely.
purposes, it gets too many people in trouble. All right, so now I'm taking a much bigger brush. That's another important thing. Use the correct size brush for the area you're going to be painting. And correct size is as big as possible, and you can still get the job done. This is a number 30 round, or I could also have used this one. That's what I used in the past. This is 1 inch flat, holds a lot of water, whatever. I'm gonna put water on the sky. Now, you know, wherever you put water on, the colors are gonna flow. So I'm gonna take my time and put water on, because this is my sky area. So I paint almost down to the line that I have put down for where I want these peaks of the mountains. But I don't go all the way to the line, because the water does seep a little bit past where you put it. And so I don't really want it to seep past the lines. So that's why I do it like this. And I'm just painting on a 140 pound today, so it's gonna buckle on me a little bit. But I thought that would be a good opportunity. I often paint on 300 pound, which is, you know, more than twice as thick, and that doesn't buckle much. But I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to show you how to deal with watercolor paper that buckles on you. Now, 140 pound is a very good thickness of watercolor paper. You certainly don't have to go up to the expense of, you know, buying 300 pound, because it is twice as expensive. as long as you get the good watercolor paper, and I happen to be a fan of Arches, A-R-C-H-E-S. That's my favorite paper. But there are certainly other good watercolor papers out there, other brands that other people might like better. Arches is probably the most easily available watercolor paper in the United States as far as getting it, because I think it's the watercolor paper that's most used by most artists. If you look at any of those, watercolor books and competitions and whatnot, I would say probably at least 75% of all using Arches. And it's Arches cold press, which means it has some texture. There's hot pressed, super smooth. And then there's rough, which has more texture than the cold press. Cold press is nice, medium of the road, can lend itself to many different styles. Okay, so you can see I'm taking my time, and I'll get little hairs in here. If I can get them out, I will. And if I can't, I'll just blow them off when it's dry. The only time you do not want to try and get the hairs out is once you got pigment on, because then you're going to make marks. Okay, so can you see how nice and shiny it is? Lots of water. And since we live in such a dry climate, it's an extra dry day today, we want to make sure that we give it time to sink in, and we might even have to apply again. The more water you have on, the more it dilutes, of course, the colors, but I'm going for a fairly light sky. But it also makes the colors, the pigment, run faster. The more water you have on, the faster the pigment runs. The more it starts drying, the pigment slows down, and that's where you have you run the risk of getting some brush strokes showing, because the water pigment is so slow. And I don't really necessarily want brush marks in my sky, so I am just gonna. I gave it a little time, and watercolorists, we are always judging the level of water on our paper, and you can see if it's super duper duper shiny, and sometimes like here I have so much on it probably would even puddle. Can you see it runs a little bit? It's very, very wet. And other places you can see it's like it's losing the shine. That means it's already beginning to dry. So we are always judging our watercolor paper to see how much shine is there, how much water is in there, because that determines how my pigment's going to react. Alrighty. And if it buckles too much, and you can see it buckles a little bit, it's really not too bad, you can always spray it on the back side. First of all, it's gonna let it lay flat better, because then, the back side is also wet, and of course it helps you keep the moisture in the paper a little bit longer. All right, so now enough chatting, gotta get some color on here. So I'm starting from the edge, because the sky, if I want it realistic looking, as realistic as we're gonna get here, the sky is darker at the top, and it gets paler as it goes down to the horizon. And just because I put that pink out, I'm gonna put a little bit of pink in here, and I'm just gonna let it mix in with the blue here. And I'm not too worried about my brush strokes here, because I have so much water on. I know that it's going to put a little bit more over here of that pink. I know that it's gonna run and mix and give me some nice smooth transitions. So now I'm gonna rinse out my brush, and before it dries on me, I'm taking the water out. You see how I go on here all the time? And now I'm just with the tip, I'm barely touching it. I'm just making sure that I don't get I don't want like a white halo, because you can see the pigment stops where it's dry. Remember I said I was going to stop a little bit outside my pencil line, and see, that's where the pigment stops. Well, I don't want that look. So I have to go in with just a barely damp brush and just guide that pigment in to go all the way down to the pencil line. So I've got to be a little fast here, because it's going to dry on me otherwise, and I don't want it to look outlined. So there we have that. And I think I'll make it down here. and then I can hold it. I am a big fan. I don't tape my paper down. Some artists like to tape their paper down. I usually don't, because I like to have gravity help me out. It rarely does, but here in watercolor I can finally get it to help me out a little bit. Usually it's my enemy, but not in watercolor. So I'm just looking at where I might have some dry white spots. That's gonna look not so good. There. All right. One more. Yeah. And then I'm just gonna keep an eye on it. You always want to keep an eye on your watercolors. Don't just put them aside, because as long as they're wet, stuff happens. So you want to kind of keep an eye on if stuff is happening that you want to happen, or if there's something you need to prevent. I missed here. And the more I, kind of keep an eye on it, and I let it move around. Can you see how I get these nice soft transitions? Gives that sky a little bit of a glow. I like it. I like it. So I am going to let you go down and paint in your sky, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to do the rest of it. And I'm just going to show you how I'll do these little mountain peaks. So I have, my colors already out, and now I'm just going to do a different color combination. I'm still thinking of perspective, even though, this is not being, it's not a realistic, but it's, it's recognizable shapes. It is a landscape. So perspective, we tell perspective with colors. We tell perspective with size and overlapping. So I'm going to start with the mountain ranges that are the furthest away from me. They will be lighter and bluer than the ones that get closer to me. That's atmospheric perspective. That's how we tell that story. So I'm going to use my cobalt blue as my base. So that's my sky color basically. But now I'm going to dirty it up with a little bit of burnt sienna. See how it graded down a little bit? And since I like a little bit of a lavender, maybe I put a little hint. I just put a dab of the opera rose in. You could put a dab of red in or pink in if you want to. See how that made it not a lavender, but just pushed it that way a little bit. All right, so I'm not going to rinse that brush out. I am going to put some water inside where I want that color. And I made these shapes that I'm planning on leaving white, so I'm going to try and not put water in them. But you don't have to do that if you decided that that was not how you wanted to do it. You don't have to do that. So I put a little bit of water in, can you see? Just because I want to make sure it runs for me. A little dab here, just to get that extra drop off. And then, can you see how it runs? And then, the pigment follows wherever there's water, and it's stops where it hits dry. So I just put some, and I'm starting from the top and letting it just kind of run down. And I'm painting out around these shapes I had created. So, and can you see how I get a fuzzy line there? This is what I want. And then here and here. And just because I always like to mix things up, I'm going to adapt in a little bit of the pink just to change the color a little bit. And then here and here. There. There's those. And I'm just going to turn my paper. You can always turn your paper. You don't have to paint right side up. And now I'm just going to fill it out with this color, this grayish blue color that I have. And I'm going to put a little bit more in while I can. While it's still wet, you can dab in more pigment. Once it starts drying, you got to stay out. Okay, so there's one little mountain. And then I'm going to wet the next one. And so I can't paint this one right now, because you don't want to paint two areas next to each other when one of them is still wet. Then they're going to run together. So I got to move around. So I move over here and I do the exact same thing. And And I'm going to use a similar color. And I'm not going too crazy with, you know, shading and all that stuff, because that's where all my line work is going to come in. So I just want kind of a fairly basic background color on these mountaintops. Because then the fun comes when I put the patterns on. So, you know, if you have it too, it's kind of a waste of time in a sense, right? If you put a lot of effort into shading and stuff, because you won't see that once you put the penwork on. Now I take a little bit more pink, just because I don't want it to be exactly the same color like the other one.
So did you have burnt sienna in that blue too?
A little bit of burnt sienna, that was what graded down, yes. That's exactly right. And I do the exact same thing, just combine these. I made it a little bit harder for myself because I put those little white things in, but I put them in, so now I'm going to paint around them, so there.
That'll teach you.
That'll teach me exactly. But, and you can see with this brush here, that's my dagger brush, my favorite brush. You know, I love it because it will hold quite a bit of pigment, and at the same time it'll get into all the nitty gritty areas, so I don't have to run around changing brushes in the middle of everything. That's often a recipe for disaster, because, you know, it's all about this judging of water and pigment level. That's going to make the difference from whether you can combine these things without getting, I don't know if I did right or wrong here, but now I did it. Yeah, I did right. I think I did right anyway. Now it's going to be like that. You know, even if you don't paint where you have your lines, it's no big deal. It's your painting, you can change your mind.
With a paint can.
Yeah. And get these here. There's that. Yeah, I think I did paint over something, but that's okay. Doesn't matter.
The color
Yeah.
is like a transparent indigo.
It's a nice color, isn't it?
It's really pretty. It's
beautiful color.
transparent.
Yes, grayed down a little bit with that burnt sienna, and now I got a. No, did I have something there?
Did you make it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did. It was cobalt blue with a little bit. You don't put very much burnt sienna in, because burnt sienna has much more tinting power than the cobalt blue does. So put. Let's see here. I put burnt sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna in, and then I put a little bit of pink in to kind of gray it down. So I'm just gonna get color on all my mountains. So you can do the same, and then we'll reconvene when I get further down and I want to start really changing the colors. So you don't want to go too dark, because, you know, you want to have, I mean, you can. We can use light pens, but if you want to have black pen work on, you know, you don't want to have it too dark.
How many colors should you mix?
You know, if you mix too many colors, you get mud.
That's what I was wondering. Is there like a rule of thumb of, like, I heard 3 colors.
Yeah, 3 colors, and you can make mud with 3 colors if that's what you're after. But because if you mix red, blue, and yellow, basically, so it depends on what colors you're mixing. It's better to say, if you mix all 3 primary colors in whatever combination, you're gonna get mud. So you have to have an overweight of one of them, either leaning more blues, or more reds, or more yellows, to make it not a muddy color. But the more you mix colors, the more you're gonna get mud. So there's no such thing as going from a muddy color to mix it brighter. Doesn't happen. That's what people sometimes they think, if they mix a bunch of bright colors, it's gonna be extra bright. No.
Extra muddy.
Extra muddy, exactly.
So I am just going to continue putting color in all the mountain shapes and in the foreground. And I'm going to think about atmospheric perspective, so remember that cool colors go back and warm colors bring forward, and in the background you'll keep things like grayer, bluer, and paler than when you move into the foreground. So in the foreground I will introduce a little bit of yellow so I get some green tones in the very foreground. And I'm going to meet you then in part 2 of this Zen Mountain in watercolor demo, and I'll have this painting finished for the centangles that I'm going to put on top. So see you in part 2.